2020 has been a dreadful year, and while we wait for the clock to strike midnight, we have to acknowledge that many of the problems and catastrophes that populated the beginning of this new decade will continue into next year, and the year after. It is an unfathomably large pill to swallow. We are choking on this pill. At the absolute bottom of the list of everything wrong with 2020 is entertainment. It is not as important as the everything else of 2020. Nevertheless, in a year in which we all could have used some relief, some art, some enrichment, some distraction, the movie industry, as much as everything else, ground to a halt. A handful of big releases in January, February, and March before we were well and truly f***ed are all that filled out the theaters this year, save for a few ill-conceived summer releases that defiantly and foolishly shoehorned themselves into megaplexes and accidentally hastened the ruination of the industry. Fortunately, a lot of low-budget fare that was always designed for home releases made its way to us on schedule, and a few big-budget tentpoles were planted on streaming. To close out the year, I would like to spread a thin layer of love to every 2020 movie I liked in the order in which I watched them, not as some numbered list. This is not a video about every movie I saw, but a video about every movie I liked. If it does not appear, it means I didn't see it or didn't like it. There is no reason to ask why I did not see a movie in 2020 because it was 2020, and there is no reason to ask why I didn't like a movie enough to add it because I would prefer to keep things light today. I spent most of January at the theaters catching up on the movies from December. The first 2020 movie I actually enjoyed was The Lodge, a horror film set in a secluded home in the middle of nowhere. Horror set in a cabin in the woods is more than a trope, but a thoroughly dissected occurrence in the genre. The Lodge is not that. There is no designated virginal final girl or evil that must be vanquished only after a steady body count. No, this is a psychological horror that accuses the plot of being supernatural but can't prove it, leading to a psychosis, a nightmare of the children and the woman desperately trying to determine whether or not they are still alive or have passed into hell after a gas leak. It is bleak and disturbing and accidentally foretold the cabin fever waking dream of the quarantine that hit shortly after its release. I saw an entirely different horror movie shortly thereafter, The Invisible Man. With the failure of the Dark Universe, this classic monster was modernized to great effect. A story of a toxic, abusive relationship. Gaslighting as horror. Elizabeth Moss is about as close to pitch perfect in this as humanly possible. Flawlessly sympathetic in the beginning and then earning the most satisfying, diabolical ending that feels like justice whether it is or not. The next 2020 movie I actually saw was Onward, which was fine. It wasn't good, but it was good enough. It tread no real new ground for Pixar, but that is what Pixar does. It delivers a new coming-of-age acceptance family movie every few years for children who have this year become the demographic that is coming of age and requires acceptance from their families. It is a perfectly acceptable formula for movies made for children of a certain age. I saw Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. It was given a limited theatrical release in February, but I saw it through home release. It's a documentary on the absolute wonderful queerness of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and how its star, Mark Patton, lost his career due to his involvement in the picture. It is touching and remarkable, and I hope everyone sees it. On Netflix in March, we were given arguably the best horror movie of the year, The Platform. An allegory about starting a revolution from the bottom up, The Platform takes place in a twisted world that is, arguably, not that unlike ours. It's only a hyper-reality exaggeration of ours. The movie is hard on the eyes as it traffics in both misery and disgust, but that does not mean the film presents hopelessness. The platform is a banner, a flag, motivation under the weight of a crushing system. Over the summer, I saw The Vast of Night. A frighteningly quiet science fiction film set in the 1950s, The Vast of Night feels very real, very lived in and authentic, in spite of it being sci-fi and taking place the better part of a century ago. Familiar in the way that a grandparent you have not seen lately feels familiar. Like home, but also not as an everyday occurrence. A low-tech and low-budget science fiction film that also feels incredibly polished and shiny. Then I saw Bad Trip, and honestly, it was one of the most pleasant experiences of my entire year. It answers the question, what if the Eric Andre Show were a movie? And that answer turned out to be kind of the same, but more elaborate. It might be going too far to say it was the best comedy I saw this year, but it was the most I laughed all year, if that gives any hints as to what my sense of humor is like. Next, I watched Class Action Park, a documentary on HBO that more or less told me what I already knew about Action Park from the Defunctland episode, but with more talking heads and an uncomfortable amount of apologia for and even lionizing of the owner toward the end. Not a lot, but anything that is a non-zero amount of praise for the owner is too much. That being said, I did enjoy it, so by my own rules it must be part of this, I guess. Bill and Ted Face the Music was released on video on demand and kind of in theaters. Obviously I chose the former, not the latter. It was August. This movie deserved more. More everything really, more attention, more praise, and honestly more of a budget. Unlike The Vast of Night, a sci-fi movie that used its limited budget accordingly, Bill and Ted Face the Music is a big budget story without the means in which to tell it. The director did not hide this well, opting to display the cheap-looking future herbal performances that Bill and Ted Face the Music manages to break free of some of its constraints. It was precisely what we all needed in August of 2020 when it was released. Relic is a close runner-up for Best Horror Film of the Year, age and turn into something else. Only in this film, the something else is supernatural and terrifying. I won't give away the ending, but it's both touching and ominous. Host. Put together quickly under quarantine, this Zoom call horror movie takes advantage of the circumstances of 2020, but not in a way that felt exploitative. It's not about the pandemic, it just can't help but take place during it. Best jump scare of the year, no spoilers for when it happens. Borat subsequent movie film. Nobody was expecting a Borat sequel. Nobody was expecting a Borat sequel this year. And nobody was expecting a Borat sequel to be good, but it was. Painfully relevant and joyously optimistic. Although not the best movie of 2020, it is the most 2020 movie. I saw Mank earlier this month. The titular character is not so much a person as an observer in this historically inaccurate daydream through old Hollywood. It's the least Fincher-like Fincher movie he has ever made in that it's almost, but not quite, wholesome and endearing. Soul, the perfect Christmas release for this year. Pixar's movies are generally meant to be more meaningful for children but enjoyable for adults, but Soul feels like a movie that is the reverse. More meaningful for adults but enjoyable for children. Soul is about obsessions in life and the necessity of getting some living in your life too, but this resonates more with adults who have done a lot more living and obsessing. That does not mean it's a bad kids movie, it's just different and welcome. Finally, Color Out of Space, which I only saw a few days ago as of the time of this writing. Nicolas Cage plays a father who encounters an entity or power from outer space and instead of going for help, resolves to handle it himself as the put-upon patriarch of the family. It does not go well, which might be the point of the movie. Clueless dads who think they know everything need to shut the f*** up. I don't know. Pretty though. I love pink and purple. There are a great many horror movies in this video, and while part of that is because I enjoy the genre, it's also because horror movies are made inexpensively and often for home video and streaming anyway. And that about does it. Great. A not altogether depressing video. Let's see how that holds up in 2021. See you then.